I've always been the reliable one. My name is Emma, and for as long as I can remember, I've always been the one who stepped up to take care of things. It wasn't a big deal at first. As a kid, I didn't mind doing the chores that my brother Luke didn't, or helping my parents when they needed it. I was the problem solver, the one who found a way to get things done when no one else could. Growing up, I didn't think much of it. My parents had their hands full with their own issues. And Luke, well, Luke was always doing his thing. He had dreams but never quite followed through. Meanwhile, I stayed focused on the practical side of life. I went to school, got good grades, and worked part-time jobs to help out at home. I didn't ask for much in return, and honestly, I didn't expect anything. I thought that's what family was all about. But over the years, I began to realize how much I was sacrificing. Not just for my parents, but for Luke, too. Whenever something went wrong, I was the first one they turned to. It was always me who picked up the slack. No one ever questioned it. In fact, they came to rely on it. My mom would call me at the last minute, asking me to cover a bill that was due, or asking me to pay for a new appliance that had broken. And my dad, well, he'd ask me to transfer money to cover an unexpected car repair. They never seemed to consider how hard I was working, or how little I had left after all the help I gave. But I didn't mind. I told myself that I was doing the right thing. After all, what good was money if I couldn't help my family? Then there was Luke. Luke, who never had a job for long and always seemed to find himself in a mess. He'd lose a job or drop out of school, and I'd be there to help him. I'd lend him money when he needed it, cover for him when he didn't show up, and clean up the mess when he got in trouble. And he'd always promise to get better, to try harder. I believed him every time. But something started to shift. After a few years of this, I started to feel like I was running on empty. I was always the one stepping in, the one fixing things, while Luke continued to coast through life, knowing I'd be there to bail him out. My parents were no better. They loved me. I knew that. But they seemed to take me for granted. They didn't ask how I was doing, they just expected that I would help. And for the longest time, I did. But there was always this nagging feeling inside me, like I was disappearing into the background. Like no matter how hard I worked or how much I gave, I was always just the person who showed up to clean up after everyone else. I wasn't seen for who I was. I was just the fixer. The one who made everything work. The pressure built up over the years. I started resenting my role in the family, even though I didn't want to. I started feeling suffocated, trapped by the expectations placed on me. Every time I thought about doing something for myself, there was always someone who needed me. It didn't seem to matter how much I had already given, there was always more that needed to be done. And I just kept giving. It wasn't until I reached a breaking point that I realized how much I had been carrying. It was a slow realization at first. It wasn't one moment, but a series of small moments that started to add up. I'd be at work, exhausted from a long week, only to get a call from my mom asking me to wire money for something else, an unexpected expense, something she couldn't handle, or I'd be trying to save up for a vacation. But Luke would call me, needing help paying off a bill he'd forgotten about. And I'd give in, because it seemed like the right thing to do. But each time it chipped away at me. It wasn't just the money. It was the emotional toll it took. I was constantly worrying about everyone else's problems. But no one ever asked how I was doing. No one ever checked in to see if I was okay. No one ever said, "Emma, you've done enough. Let us take care of you for once." I didn't realize it at the time, but this cycle of giving, of being the one who always stepped up, was starting to break me. I was losing myself, bit by bit. And the more I gave, the less I received in return, not just from my family, but from life in general. I had become so consumed with taking care of everyone else that I didn't even know how to take care of myself anymore. It was in those quiet moments, when I was alone in my apartment, that I would feel the weight of it all, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the overwhelming pressure to keep everything together when I could barely keep myself intact. I started to realize that no one else was ever going to step up. If I didn't do it, no one would. But despite all of this, I still couldn't shake the feeling that it was my duty to help. I told myself I was just being a good daughter, a good sister. I was doing what family was supposed to do. But deep down, I knew something had to change. I just didn't know how or when. I was caught in this constant struggle between what I wanted for myself and what I felt obligated to do for my family. And the more I tried to give, the more I felt like I was losing myself in the process. That was just the beginning. The moment I realized how deeply I had been drowning in this cycle, I tried to talk to my family about it. But each conversation felt like an uphill battle, one that led to the same outcome: me apologizing for feeling overwhelmed, and them not understanding the weight I was carrying. I remember one evening, a few months after I had helped Luke pay off another round of debt. I sat at the kitchen table after a long day at work, feeling completely exhausted. I was staring at the bills that needed to be paid, the pile of emails I had to respond to, and the emptiness that came with doing everything for everyone else, without any acknowledgement. It was my mom who called me that night. "Emma, sweetheart, your dad's car broke down. Can you help us out again? We don't have the money for the repairs right now," she asked, her voice soft, almost apologetic. My heart sank. "I just gave you money last week for the utilities," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm really running low here." "Mom." But she was persistent, her tone becoming more insistent. "I know, darling, but this is different. The car is essential. If we don't fix it, your dad won't be able to get to work. I don't know what else to do." I could feel the weight of her words, the underlying guilt she was trying to place on me. My parents weren't bad people, they just had this way of subtly manipulating me into doing what they needed. They didn't mean to. Not really. But it was like I was the automatic solution to their problems. I didn't want to say no. I didn't want to let them down. So, I pulled out my credit card, transferred the money, and then tried to push away the feeling of resentment that had already started to build in my chest. The truth was, I was starting to resent being the one who was always expected to help. Every time I did, I felt like I was being pulled deeper into a hole that I couldn't escape from. No matter how much I gave, it was never enough. No one seemed to notice how much I was sacrificing. No one saw that I was living paycheck to paycheck, barely scraping by after covering everyone else's expenses. And then there was Luke. He had this ability to look at me with those big, hopeful eyes and make me believe that, this time, things would be different. But each time, they weren't. Each time, he would promise he was going to change, that he was going to turn his life around, but nothing ever changed. Luke was 27, and I had been helping him for years, paying his bills, bailing him out of debt, and providing him with everything he needed to survive. He had tried out several careers, none of which stuck, and he had dropped out of college when things got too difficult. Yet, every time I questioned him about his plans or his future, he would get defensive, angry even, as though I was the problem for simply wanting him to take responsibility for his own life. I had stopped asking myself whether Luke truly appreciated everything I had done for him. There was just this nagging feeling that I was enabling his behavior, that by constantly stepping in to fix things, I was teaching him that he didn't need to learn how to stand on his own. And yet, every time I thought about pulling away, about setting boundaries, I felt guilty. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the emotional toll, the feeling of being trapped in a role that wasn't mine to play. I wasn't just his sister anymore. I had become his financial safety net. his unpaid caretaker, and his fallback plan whenever life got hard. It wasn't until one day, when I found myself staring at my bank account, feeling like I was living paycheck to paycheck, that I realized just how much of my own life I had given away. I had become so accustomed to sacrificing my own needs for the sake of my family that I couldn't even remember the last time I did something for myself. Luke's situation hadn't improved. In fact, it had gotten worse. He had quit his most recent job because the boss was too controlling, and had decided to start his own business. Of course, it hadn't gone well, and he was now in deeper debt than before. And yet, he called me again, asking for help. "Emma, I need $1,500 to cover some legal fees. I've got the clients lined up. I just need a little more time," he said. His voice was filled with desperation, and I knew that this was the same song and dance I had heard 100 times before. I didn't answer right away. I stared at the phone, feeling that familiar sense of dread creep in. It wasn't the first time Luke had asked for help, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But something inside me snapped. I couldn't do it anymore. I was drained, both emotionally and financially. I had given so much of myself that I didn't even know who I was anymore. My own dreams had been put on hold for the sake of helping everyone else. And for what? To watch them make the same mistakes over and over again, I realized that helping Luke was no longer about kindness or love. It was about my own guilt, my own fear of saying no. But the truth was, I wasn't doing him any favors. I was enabling him to continue making poor decisions, and I was allowing myself to be used in the process. I had been carrying the weight of his life on my shoulders for too long. That was the moment I decided to stop. I wasn't going to bail him out anymore. I wasn't going to sacrifice myself for his mistakes. I had worked too hard to build a life for myself to keep giving it all away. It was time for Luke to face the consequences of his actions. I didn't know how he would react. I didn't know if I would ever hear from him again. But I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't keep living like this. It wasn't long after I had decided to stop enabling Luke's bad decisions that I got a phone call from him. This one felt different. There was an urgency in his voice that I hadn't heard before. He needed help, and he needed it now. "Emma, I'm in real trouble. I don't know who else to turn to. I'm behind on my rent, and the landlord's threatening eviction. I can't lose this place. I'll lose everything. I just need $2,000 to get caught up." I froze when I heard the amount. It was more than I had ever helped him with before. And it wasn't just a small loan like the others, it was a significant chunk of money, something that would drain my savings even more. But as I listened to his voice, filled with panic, I couldn't help but feel a tug in my chest. He sounded desperate. I knew how much this place meant to him. It was the only place he had ever felt stable. But at what cost was this stability I had already given so much to him? And it had always ended the same way. He promised he would pay me back, but I had yet to see a dime of the money I had sent him in the past. Despite the doubt in my mind, despite the anger and frustration that was building inside me, I found myself on the edge of saying yes. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the guilt. I couldn't stand the thought of him losing his home. But something inside me, something I hadn't listened to in years, finally spoke up. This was it. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't be the person who always fixed everything for everyone else. "Luke, I can't do it," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I've helped you so many times, and it's never changed anything. I can't keep doing this. You have to figure this out on your own." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Luke's breath hitch, the silence thick with disbelief. Then, his voice came through, cold and biting. "You're really going to do this? After everything I've been through, you're just going to walk away?" I flinched at his words, but I stood my ground. I'm not walking away from you. Luke, I'm just telling you that I can't keep fixing your mistakes. You have to take responsibility for your life. The anger in his voice was palpable now. You think I don't know that? You think I don't know how much I've messed up, but I can't do it alone. You're supposed to be my sister. You're supposed to help me. I've helped you more than I ever should have, I replied, my voice shaking with emotion. And I'm done. You need to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. I'm not your safety net anymore. There was a long silence before he spoke again, his words laced with venom. You're not my sister anymore. You've abandoned me. Just like everyone else. I don't need people like you in my life. His words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so many years thinking that I was helping him, that I was being the family member he needed, but all along, I had been enabling him to keep making poor choices. And now, when I finally stood up for myself, he turned on me. I hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of relief and heartbreak. I had finally done what I needed to do. But it hurt. I never expected Luke to react that way. I thought he would understand, or at least be disappointed. But not angry. Not like this. For the next few days, I tried to push the pain away. I focused on work, on taking care of myself. But the guilt lingered. Was I wrong to stand my ground? Was I really abandoning him? I tried to call my mom for some support, but when she picked up, I could tell something was wrong. Emma, I need to talk to you about Luke, she said, her voice trembling. I sighed, already knowing where this was going. What happened? Mom. He's been so upset ever since you told him no. He's saying you're turning your back on the family. He needs you. Emma, please, just help him out one more time. I felt my anger flare up. Mom, I've done enough. I've given him everything I have. And it's never enough. He needs to learn how to take responsibility for himself. I can't keep enabling him. She was silent for a moment before speaking again, this time with a note of frustration in her voice. He's your brother, Emma. You should be there for him. What kind of family abandons each other like this? The words stung, but I didn't back down. I'm not abandoning him. I'm setting a boundary. This isn't healthy for either of us. I can't keep sacrificing my future for his mistakes. It was clear that my mom didn't understand, but I couldn't change her mind. I had to focus on what was best for me, even if it meant standing up to my family. That night, I received a text from Luke. It was short and harsh. Thanks for nothing. You're just like everyone else. Don't bother contacting me again. It hit me like a punch to the stomach, but I refused to let it drag me down. This was the consequence of years of enabling, and I couldn't keep going down that path. I had to let him go. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. I had done what was right for me. I had set a boundary, even though it hurt. I knew that I couldn't keep sacrificing myself to save others. It was time for me to live for myself. The days after I cut ties with Luke were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. The silence was deafening. The phone, which used to be a lifeline to all my family's crises, lay untouched on my desk. I had to stop myself from checking it constantly, wondering if there was a message or a call, some sign that Luke would come around, or that my mom would soften her stance. But nothing came. In the first few days, I felt a sense of relief, a weight lifting from my chest. For the first time in ages, I wasn't constantly in crisis mode. I wasn't worrying about who needed what, who was getting into more trouble, or who was angry at me for not giving them more. The silence, which had once felt suffocating, now felt like freedom. But that feeling didn't last long. It was replaced by an uncomfortable gnawing in my stomach. The guilt started to creep in. Had I done the right thing? Was it wrong to stop helping? I thought of all the years I had spent trying to patch things up, putting out fires that were never mine to put out. But the idea of completely severing ties, of fully walking away from Luke, was harder than I expected. I began to replay the conversations in my head, especially the last one with my mom. I had told her I was setting boundaries, but in my heart, I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. How could I be so firm? How could I walk away from the family I had always tried so hard to help? The real blow came a few weeks later, when I saw Luke's social media post. It was a photo of him in front of the building where he had rented an apartment. The caption read, "Starting fresh. I'm done relying on anyone but myself. I'm making things happen." For a moment, I felt a surge of emotion, relief mixed with anger, pride mixed with sadness. Relief because maybe, just maybe, Luke was finally taking responsibility. Maybe this was the turning point I had been hoping for. Anger because I had been the one to push him into a corner, and in that process, I felt like I had lost him. And then, there was pride. Maybe he was learning. Maybe my decision, as painful as it had been, was the catalyst he needed to change. But as the days went on, I realized something important. His post wasn't a victory for me. It was a victory for him. And it wasn't about me anymore. The changes he made, the lessons he learned, they weren't for me, they were for him. I wasn't the one who needed to see the progress. It wasn't about me getting validation for helping him. It was about him becoming the person he was meant to be. I began to understand that part of letting go of someone is realizing that you cannot control their growth. I had spent so much of my life trying to steer Luke, trying to fix his mistakes, but in doing so, I had neglected my own life and happiness. I had put my hopes for his future before my own, and it was suffocating me. I started focusing on myself. I found a new hobby, something I had always wanted to try but never had the time for: photography. I spent weekends exploring new places, capturing moments, and rediscovering the joy of having something that was just for me. I realized how much of my time and energy had been spent on people who couldn't or wouldn't see the effort I was putting in. And for the first time, I started asking myself, what do I want? What makes me happy? But even though I was focusing on myself, the guilt never completely went away. I would still think about Luke, still worry if he was really okay, still question whether I had done the right thing. And then I would hear from my mom. Her texts were brief, just little updates about Luke's life, as if she were trying to paint a picture of how he was doing without directly confronting me about the rift between us. "He's doing better," she would say. "He's keeping busy. I think he's really trying this time." I would read her messages and feel torn. Part of me wanted to celebrate that he was trying, that my stepping back had somehow given him the push he needed, but another part of me still felt like the villain in the story, like I had abandoned him when he needed me the most. One afternoon, after yet another message from my mom about Luke's progress, I sat down and really thought about everything that had happened. I thought about how much I had given, how much I had sacrificed for a family that never seemed to fully appreciate it. And I thought about the lesson I had learned sometimes. The greatest act of love is not helping. It's stepping back and letting someone fall. Because it's only when we hit rock bottom that we find the strength to climb up on our own. I finally understood that Luke's journey was his own. I couldn't fix it for him, and I couldn't keep sacrificing my own life to make his better. I had done my part. I had given him the resources, the opportunities, and the love he needed to make changes. But in the end, it was his responsibility to take the next step. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my decision to stop helping him wasn't a betrayal. It was an act of self-preservation. I had spent too many years trying to save him, and in the process, I had forgotten how to save myself. And now, for the first time in a long time, I was learning how to take care of me. I didn't have to be the fixer anymore. I didn't have to be the one who always put others first. I could live my life on my terms, without the weight of other people's problems on my shoulders. That's when I knew I had made the right choice. I thought the silence between me and Luke would last forever. I thought that, once I'd stopped helping him, once I'd set that boundary, he would either come to understand or simply walk away, and I'd never have to deal with the tension again. But as much as I tried to avoid it, I couldn't escape the inevitable. A few weeks passed before I heard from him again. It wasn't a call. It wasn't even a text message. It was a voicemail. I had been out walking, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the quiet peace of my neighborhood. When my phone rang, I glanced at the screen and saw his name, Luke. I stood still for a moment, letting the phone ring through. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I wasn't ready to face him. The pain of everything that had happened, the years of sacrificing for him, the years of feeling taken for granted, and then the final confrontation still stung too much. I didn't pick up. When I got back to my apartment, I checked the voicemail. His voice sounded different this time. It wasn't the usual anger or bitterness. It was softer, almost apologetic. "Emma," he started, his voice shaky. "I know things have been really messed up between us, and I know I've said things I didn't mean, but I just wanted you to know that I'm trying. I'm really trying. And I don't want to lose you as a sister." I stood there, phone in hand, trying to process his words. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, a mix of sadness and relief. For the first time, I realized how much I had been hoping for this. I had been hoping that one day, Luke would come around, that he would see the truth about what I was trying to do for him. But now that it was here, I didn't know how to respond. I sat down on the couch, staring at my phone. There was so much I wanted to say to him. I wanted to tell him how much it hurt to feel used. I wanted to tell him that I had given everything I had, and I wasn't sure if I could give any more. I wanted to tell him that I was proud of him for trying to get his life together, but that it didn't erase all the damage that had been done. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about him. It was about me, too. It was about how much I had changed over the past few months. I wasn't the same person who had been ready to give up everything for the sake of others. I had learned how to put myself first. I had learned how to take care of myself, how to say no, how to walk away when the cost was too high. So I did the hardest thing I had ever done. I sat down, took a deep breath, and sent him a text. "I hear you. Luke, I'm glad you're trying, but I need to keep the boundaries I've set. I can't go back to the way things were. You need to keep doing this on your own, but I'll always be here if you need me on your terms, not mine." I hit send, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. It wasn't an easy message to send, but it was the truth. I had done everything I could for him, and now it was time for him to stand on his own. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept replaying the message in my mind, wondering if I had said too much or too little. Was I being too harsh? Should I have softened my words, but deep down, I knew it was the right choice. I had to protect myself. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness for the sake of someone else's growth. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. I didn't hear back from Luke immediately, and the silence felt suffocating. But as the days passed, I began to realize that the silence wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It was just a sign that he was processing, that he was figuring things out on his own. And for the first time, I wasn't holding his hand through every decision. Eventually, after what felt like weeks of silence, I received another message. This time, it wasn't a voicemail or a call. It was just a simple text. "Thank you for not giving up on me. I'm sorry for everything." It wasn't the apology I had hoped for, But it was enough. It was a sign that, despite everything that had happened, Luke was starting to take responsibility. He was starting to understand that he needed to make his own way, and I wasn't going to be there to bail him out anymore. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know what to say. I didn't need to say anything. The message was enough. It was a small victory, not for me, but for him. He was on the right path now, even if it wasn't a straight line. The next few months were quiet. I focused on myself. I started taking longer walks, spending weekends exploring new hobbies, and finding joy in the little things. I no longer felt the constant weight of my family's expectations pressing down on me. For the first time in ages, I felt free. And then, one Sunday, I bumped into Luke at the grocery store. He looked different, calmer, more centered. We exchanged awkward smiles and small talk. But there was something unspoken between us. We both knew that things were never going to be the same again. But it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a new beginning. "I'm doing okay," he said quietly, as if testing the waters. "I've been working a lot, and I think I'm finally figuring things out. I'm glad," I replied, genuinely meaning it. For a moment, we just stood there. Two people who had spent years trying to fix each other but had finally realized that the only person who could change our lives was ourselves. As I walked away from the store that day, I realized that I hadn't just let Luke go, I had let myself go. And in doing so, I had given both of us the space we needed to grow. I had done the right thing. And finally, I was at peace. The months that followed were a quiet transformation for me. I had always believed that family came first, that loyalty meant sacrificing everything for those you loved. But with time, I learned that there's a fine line between loving and enabling. I had been stuck in a loop of giving, hoping for change that never came. And I finally understood that sometimes, letting go is the most loving thing you can do, not just for them, but for yourself too. I started reflecting on all the years I had spent trying to fix everyone else's lives, from helping my parents with bills to supporting Luke through every mess he got himself into. I had given my all, but somewhere along the way, I lost sight of my own needs. I thought that if I just kept going, kept helping, then eventually they would appreciate me. But the truth was, I had been running on empty, giving without receiving, and letting my own life slip through my fingers. It wasn't easy to admit, but I was tired. Tired of being the one who always had to step up. Tired of being the emotional and financial crutch for people who were perfectly capable of standing on their own. And yet, for so long, I had told myself that this was my duty, that this was the role I was supposed to play. But the truth was, no one had ever asked me if I was okay. No one had ever asked me how I felt or what I needed. It was always about what they needed from me. But now, I had a chance to reclaim my life. I started small, rediscovering the things that brought me joy before I got so caught up in everyone else's problems. I joined a photography class, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I started taking weekend trips to places I'd never seen before, allowing myself to enjoy my own company without the constant pressure of being someone else's solution. Each step felt like a small victory. I no longer felt like I was living in the shadows of others' expectations. I had started living for myself, and it felt liberating. I was learning how to be alone without feeling lonely, how to enjoy peace without guilt. But with this newfound freedom came the nagging voice of doubt. Was I really doing the right thing? Was I being selfish for finally putting myself first? The guilt would creep in when I would think about my parents, when I would think about Luke, and wonder if I was wrong for stepping away. I still loved my family. I still cared about them. But I had to stop seeing myself as their caretaker. I had to stop feeling responsible for their happiness and success. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I wanted to pick up the phone and offer help again, when I wanted to rush in and fix everything. But then I'd remember how much I had already given, how much I had sacrificed, and I would remind myself that it wasn't my job to fix things anymore. Then, one day, I received a letter from my parents. It wasn't like any letter I had ever received before. Usually, it was just casual notes or updates, but this one felt different. I opened it slowly, not knowing what to expect. The letter began with an apology from my mom. She acknowledged the hurt I had felt, the way I had been used, and how she had never truly seen the burden I was carrying. She apologized for not recognizing how much I had given. She wrote about how they had become dependent on me, and how she realized now that they had taken me for granted. There was no excuse for the way they had treated me, no justification for the way they had asked so much of me without considering my own needs. But it was an apology I hadn't expected. It was an apology I didn't even know I needed. The letter ended with a simple message. We understand why you needed to walk away, and we're sorry for not seeing it sooner. We will always love you, but we can no longer ask you to fix everything. Please take care of yourself. I read the letter several times, my emotions swirling. I had spent so many years wishing for this acknowledgement, for the validation that I wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did. And here it was finally. It didn't erase the pain, but it did offer something I had been craving: understanding. The next few weeks were filled with a bittersweet sense of peace. I couldn't undo the years I had spent sacrificing for them. I couldn't change the things I had allowed myself to tolerate for so long. But I had learned an important lesson. Love isn't about constantly giving without receiving. It's about setting boundaries, about knowing when to step back and let others learn to take care of themselves. I sent a short reply to my mom, acknowledging her letter and thanking her for understanding. I told her that I was in a better place now, focusing on my own growth, and that I hoped they would do the same. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was enough. It was a step in the right direction. As for Luke, I didn't hear from him for a while after our last conversation. I wasn't sure if he would ever reach out again, but I knew that I had done everything I could for him. It wasn't my job to fix his mistakes anymore. It wasn't my responsibility to carry the weight of his life on my shoulders. And yet, months later, I got a message from him. It wasn't an apology, but it didn't need to be. He simply said, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. I'm getting my life together. I don't need your help, but I wanted to let you know I'm finally taking control of things." I smiled as I read the message. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything I had hoped for, but it was enough. It was a sign that, despite everything, Luke was finally starting to take responsibility for his life. And in that moment, I realized that I had done the right thing by stepping back. Sometimes, love means letting go, even when it's hard. And as I sat there, reading his message, I understood that I hadn't just let Luke go, I had let myself go too. I had let go of the need to control, to fix, to carry the weight of everyone else's life. I had learned how to live for myself, and in doing so, I had found the peace I had been searching for all along. As time went on, I began to feel more and more at peace with the decisions I had made. I had carved out a new life for myself, one where I wasn't constantly trying to fix other people's problems. It felt strange at first, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit, but slowly, I realized how much better it was to live life on my own terms, free from the weight of others' expectations. I started taking risks, small ones at first. I signed up for a solo trip, something I had always wanted to do but had never been able to afford or justify. I spent a week in a small coastal town, exploring the sights, tasting new foods, and simply enjoying the freedom of being alone without the constant guilt of feeling like I was neglecting someone else. The feeling of independence, of not being tied to anyone's needs, was like a breath of fresh air. When I returned home, I felt different, more confident, more at peace with who I was. I wasn't the fixer anymore. I wasn't the one who always had to step up for everyone else. I was just me, and that felt like enough. It wasn't long after my trip that I got another message from Luke. This time, it was just a simple update. He was doing well, working steadily, and had even moved into a new apartment. There were no requests for money, no emotional pleas, just a few lines letting me know how things were going. Part of me wanted to reach out, to offer more help, but I didn't. I had already done enough. I had been there for him when he needed it, but now it was his turn to stand on his own. I had to trust that he could do it, and yet, even as I moved forward with my own life, there was still a part of me that wondered, what if I had helped him more? What if I had continued to be the safety net he seemed to need? Could he really be okay without me? I had these thoughts sometimes, late at night when everything was quiet, but then I would remind myself of the bigger picture. Luke had always had the potential to be more than the person who relied on me for everything, and while it had been hard to step away, it had also been the right thing to do. It wasn't about abandoning him, it was about letting him learn to stand on his own. One evening, about 6 months after my trip, I received a call from my mom. Her voice was lighter than it had been in a long time, and I could hear a sense of relief in her words. "Emma, we just wanted to say thank you. You were right all along. Luke is doing so much better. He's working full-time now. He's paying his own bills, and he's finally taking responsibility for his life. I think we all needed that push." I was silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. It wasn't about me being right. It was about Luke finally realizing that he needed to take charge of his own life. And even though it had been hard to walk away, even though I had questioned myself at times, hearing this felt like a validation of the decision I had made. I didn't feel pride, not exactly, but I felt a deep sense of peace, a peace that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about Luke's progress, it was about mine. It was about the fact that I had been able to give up the role of the caretaker, the fixer, and learn to prioritize my own happiness. That was the real victory. I'm really glad to hear that. "Mom," I finally said, "I'm proud of him, and proud of you, too. But I'm also proud of me for learning how to let go." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before she spoke again, more softly this time. "You've done more than enough for us, Emma. We'll never forget that." For the first time in a long while, I truly believed her. As the months passed, I continued to build the life I had always dreamed of. I worked hard, but I also played hard. I didn't let myself get stuck in the trap of thinking that I had to give everything to others in order to be worthy. I made time for the things that made me feel fulfilled, whether it was spending time with friends, traveling, or simply enjoying a quiet afternoon with a good book. And when Luke reached out again, a few months after that conversation with my mom, it was no longer with the desperation or guilt that had marked our past interactions. He just wanted to catch up. He wanted to share the progress he had made, how he had paid off his debts, found a stable job, and even started saving for his own future. "I know I've said this before," he said, "but thank you. You really did help me, even when you thought you weren't." I smiled at the message, the words carrying a weight of sincerity that I hadn't felt before. It wasn't an apology, exactly, but it was acknowledgement. It was the first time I felt that Luke truly understood what I had done for him and what I had done for myself by walking away. I didn't respond right away. I didn't feel the need to, but the truth was, I was happy for him. He was learning, growing, and finally standing on his own. And I was proud of him for the first time in a long time. I was proud of him. And in that moment, I realized something important. I hadn't just helped Luke by letting him go. I had helped myself too. I had learned how to put my own needs first. I had learned how to let go of the guilt that had weighed me down for so long. I had learned how to live for me, and that was something I had never truly known how to do before. As time passed, my life gradually shifted in ways I never expected. The emotional space I had created by letting go of my family's constant demands allowed me to rebuild relationships in a new, healthier way. The connection I once had with my family, especially with my parents, had always been shaped by a sense of duty, of me being the one who always stepped up when things fell apart. But now, I was learning to redefine those relationships, not based on what I could give, but on what we could share. My relationship with my mom changed significantly after the letter she wrote me, acknowledging the years of burden I had carried. We started talking more openly about what I had been through and how it felt to be the one always expected to hold everything together. I had never realized how much my mom had underestimated the emotional cost of that role, how much I had given without anyone noticing the strain it caused. We spent a lot of time discussing my boundaries, and slowly, she began to understand the importance of those boundaries. Even though it wasn't always easy for her to let go of the patterns we had established over the years, I didn't expect instant change, but I appreciated that we were making progress. She even started encouraging me to pursue my own goals, like the photography project I'd begun. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like a step toward a more balanced relationship. Luke's growth, too, was something I began to appreciate from a new perspective. At first, I had feared that stepping away from him would make me cold and distant, that it would push him away permanently. But as I saw him work toward stability and maturity, I realized that by stepping back, I had given him the space he needed to grow. He was no longer my responsibility, and that was the best gift I could have given him. In his own way, Luke was learning to take responsibility for his life, something I had hoped for him for years. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when the old patterns would rear their heads, when Luke would make a new mistake, or when my parents would struggle financially and ask for help. But instead of automatically stepping in, I started offering emotional support instead. I listened without judgment, without fixing, and that alone seemed to make a difference. I began to understand that true love and family don't come from always fixing things. They come from offering support when it's needed and giving space when it's required. I wasn't abandoning my family by choosing not to fix their problems anymore. I was creating a healthier dynamic that allowed all of us to be stronger in the long run. Meanwhile, my personal life was flourishing. I took more trips, met new people, and found new passions. My photography skills improved, and I even sold some of my work in a local gallery. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just existing, I was thriving. I had become someone who could enjoy life on my own terms, without feeling the weight of everyone else's expectations on my shoulders. I also started dating again, something I hadn't thought about in years. I had put my own needs on hold for so long that I had forgotten how to connect with someone in a healthy way. But as I explored new relationships, I was more conscious of the boundaries I had set for myself. I knew that I wasn't looking for someone to rescue or be rescued by. I wanted a partnership, a relationship where both people could stand equally beside one another, not one where I was constantly giving while the other person took. But the most surprising part of this journey was how my view of myself had changed. I had spent years identifying myself as the helper in my family, as the one who always had to be strong for everyone else. But as I stepped back, I realized that I had more to offer than just my ability to fix problems. I had a rich inner life, filled with dreams, passions, and aspirations that I had ignored for too long. I was more than just a caretaker. I was a person with my own worth, and that was something I had forgotten along the way. Through all of this, I also discovered how deeply I had been missing out on my own sense of self-worth. The moment I stopped putting my family's needs above mine, I began to reconnect with the woman I had been before all the responsibilities took over. I started trusting my own instincts again and listening to what made me happy, not just what I thought would make others happy. This wasn't just about repairing my relationship with Luke or my parents. It was about repairing my relationship with myself. I had spent so many years bending and reshaping myself to fit the needs of others that I had lost sight of who I really was. By letting go, I was finally starting to reconnect with that version of myself, the woman who had dreams, passions, and the ability to live her life without apology. Then, about a year after I had cut ties with Luke and started focusing on my own life, we had a conversation that brought everything full circle. It was one of those moments I had been hoping for, but wasn't sure would ever come. We were sitting in a small cafe, just the two of us. He looked older, more grounded, and for the first time, I saw the person I always hoped he could be. "I owe you an apology," he began. "I know I've said it before, but I didn't really understand what you were doing. You pushed me to figure things out on my own, and it was the best thing you could have done for me. I needed to grow up, and I think I finally am." I sat there, listening to his words, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not for the apology, but for the fact that he had finally learned to stand on his own. "I'm really proud of you, Luke," I said softly, realizing that I truly meant it. "I'm proud of both of us." And for the first time in years, it felt like we had both found our footing separately, but stronger because of it. As the months continued to pass, I realized how far I had come from the person I used to be, the person who felt compelled to always fix things, to be there for everyone at the cost of my own happiness. What had once felt like an impossible and painful decision, cutting ties with Luke and setting firm boundaries with my parents, had ultimately given me the freedom to live life on my own terms. The more I embraced this new sense of self, the more I realized that my peace didn't depend on anyone else. I was no longer constantly waiting for someone to need me, nor was I held hostage by the guilt of saying no. I had learned that true peace came from within, not from fixing someone else's problems or carrying their weight. I had also learned the importance of truly defining what I wanted from my relationships. While I had grown closer to my parents again, there was a sense of balance now that had been missing before. We still talked about our lives, but I no longer allowed myself to get caught up in their problems. We were able to enjoy each other's company without the constant undertone of expectation hanging in the air. With Luke, the relationship had matured. It was no longer based on him relying on me for everything. Instead, it had become a relationship of mutual respect, where we each recognized the importance of the other, but no longer carried the burden of responsibility for each other's happiness. When we spoke, it was about our individual lives, about the challenges we were facing and the successes we were enjoying. He wasn't the younger brother who needed saving anymore. He was simply Luke. And I was Emma's siblings who had learned how to stand on our own and who could now support each other in healthier, more meaningful ways. One of the most transformative experiences during this time was reconnecting with the friends I had neglected for so long. The people who had always been there for me, but whom I had distanced myself from because I was so consumed by my family's needs. They welcomed me back with open arms, and it felt like rediscovering a part of myself that had been buried under years of caregiving and emotional exhaustion. I found myself laughing more, enjoying long, relaxed dinners with friends, going out for spontaneous coffee dates, and even joining a local book club. These were the moments that reminded me of who I was before I had become so wrapped up in being the family fixer. I had forgotten how to live in the present, how to simply enjoy the moments without the weight of others' struggles hanging over me. But now, I was beginning to experience life in a way I had never known before, free, joyful, and not burdened by the needs of others. As I continued to grow, I also realized how much I had learned about love. I had thought for so long that loving my family meant sacrificing my happiness, giving up my dreams, and constantly putting their needs first. But in letting go, I realized that love was about setting healthy boundaries. It was about understanding that we all have our own paths to walk, and that while we can support each other, we don't need to be each other's crutches. In this new chapter of my life, I also learned how to be more present in my relationships, free from the need to constantly save anyone. Instead of focusing on what I could do for others, I focused on enjoying their company and sharing life's moments with them. The relationships I had with my family, with Luke, and with my friends deepened, not because I had fixed them, but because I had given myself the space to just be. Through this process of letting go, I found a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly love and be loved. The constant feeling of exhaustion and resentment that had once weighed me down was gone. I had finally learned that loving others didn't mean losing myself in the process. In fact, it was the exact opposite. By learning to love and care for myself, I was able to give more to those around me, but in a way that was healthy and fulfilling for everyone involved. The most important realization came one evening as I was sitting alone in my apartment, enjoying the quiet. I had just returned from a photography class and was sipping tea while reading a book I had wanted to read for years. It was in this peaceful moment that I realized something fundamental. I had finally created a life that I was proud of. I had found my own balance. I had learned how to put myself first without feeling guilty, how to enjoy life without constantly worrying about others' needs. I wasn't the same person I had been a year ago, the person who thought love meant endless sacrifice. I was someone who understood that true love starts with yourself. It's not about what you can give to others. It's about knowing your own worth and setting boundaries that protect your peace. And when I looked back at everything I had gone through, the struggles, the guilt, the doubts, I realized that walking away had been the best decision I had ever made. It wasn't about abandoning my family. It was about learning to live for myself. It was about finding the strength to say no when I needed to, and the courage to prioritize my own happiness. And as I sat there, I knew that I had done the right thing. For me, for Luke, for my parents, for my future. I had created a life that was mine, and that was more than enough. It had been over a year since I made the decision to walk away, and looking back, I could hardly recognize the person I had been. The emotional weight that once defined my every day had lifted, and in its place, I had found something entirely new: peace. For the first time in years, I was able to truly breathe, to live without the constant undercurrent of guilt and obligation. When I reflected on the time I had spent taking care of everyone else, I no longer felt resentment or anger. I understood that I had done what I thought was right at the time. I had loved my family deeply, and I had wanted to help. But in the process, I had lost sight of my own needs, my own aspirations. It wasn't until I allowed myself to step back and focus on me that I began to rediscover who I was beneath the roles I had taken on. The freedom I had found in creating boundaries didn't just stop at family, it rippled out into every aspect of my life. I became more assertive in my career, voicing my desires and advocating for what I needed. I had spent so many years prioritizing everyone else's needs that I had put my own goals on the back burner. But now, I was finally able to give my dreams the attention they deserved. My photography career had flourished, and I began to take on new projects that pushed me creatively. I was no longer just taking photos for myself, I was telling stories, capturing moments that mattered. It was fulfilling in a way I had never experienced before. Each shoot, each new project, felt like a step toward becoming the person I had always been meant to be. And it wasn't just my work that had changed. I was also able to cultivate relationships with people who respected my boundaries and who appreciated me for who I was, not just for what I could do for them. I started spending more time with friends who were like-minded, who didn't need me to constantly save them or take on their burdens. These friendships were built on equality, where we all gave and took in equal measure. I realized that true connection comes from shared understanding and mutual respect, not from feeling responsible for each other's happiness. Luke had been a huge part of this transformation. Our relationship had come a long way since that moment when I finally set boundaries. It had taken time, but I could see now that he was learning to take responsibility for his life, just as I had learned to take responsibility for my own happiness. The old dynamic we had, me constantly fixing things, him always needing help, had shifted. We were now siblings who could talk about life without the weight of guilt or obligation hanging over us. One evening, we met up at a cafe for coffee. It was an easy, casual meeting, just two siblings catching up on life. Luke told me about his job, how he had been taking care of his own finances, and the steps he was taking to build a stable future. I didn't have to offer advice or step in to fix anything. He was doing it on his own. And that realization filled me with pride, not just for him, but for both of us. We had both grown in our own ways. I'm really proud of you. Luke, I told him, meaning every word. You've come so far. He smiled, the weight of the years between us slowly melting away. Thanks, Emma. I really appreciate everything you've done for me, but I get it now. I get that I have to stand on my own. I could see the maturity in his eyes, the sense of ownership he now had over his own life, and it hit me letting go hadn't been an abandonment. It had been the most loving thing I could do, both for him and for myself. By stepping back, I had allowed him the space to take control of his own life, just as I had done for myself. It was in that moment, sitting across from Luke, that I understood something crucial. The best thing I could do for the people I loved wasn't to constantly take care of them, but to allow them the freedom to take care of themselves. It wasn't about rescuing anyone. It was about supporting them while they learned to stand on their own. That day, as we parted ways, I realized that my journey was far from over. I had found peace. Yes, but peace didn't mean staying stagnant. Peace meant being free enough to continue growing, to continue discovering what I was capable of. The path I had taken had led me to a place where I was finally living for myself. And that was just the beginning. I had learned that it was okay to say no. It was okay to let go. It was okay to put myself first. And in doing so, I was becoming the person I had always been meant to be, not just the fixer, but a woman who had the strength to stand up for herself and pursue the life she wanted. The future felt bright now, not because I had solved all my family's problems or because I had done everything right, but because I had finally learned how to live authentically. I didn't need anyone else's approval to feel worthy. I had learned to define my own worth, to set my own boundaries, and to live a life that was truly my own. And for the first time in years, I felt excited about what was to come. The possibilities were endless.